Welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. Here, we look closely at the intersections of the postpartum window, the Ayurvedic perspective on health and healing, and the universal mother principles that are the keys to giving and receiving effective care. Hello, I'm Christine Devlin Eck. I'll be taking you through interviews with professionals who are making a profound difference in the lives of their clients, conversations with individuals brave enough to share their stories of vulnerability as a way to lift up others, and my own journey through birth, parenting, caregiving, and building a conscious business. We are here to honor the sacred windows, the profound transitions in life that give it all meaning. Welcome to the conversation.
And I will never be the same again.
Hello, and welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. This is an episode today where we're going to be talking about exploring support throughout the foster to adopt journey, the unique considerations that parents are navigating, how we as care providers or loved ones can show up in ways that make an impact during this really important transition for families that, as far as I'm concerned, is really not talked about enough. This is also a really special interview for me because my guests are Kat Devlin and Shannon Brennan. They are incredible parents. And Kat is my biological sister. Shannon is her co-parent and a very dear sister to me for the last almost 20 years. So they have graciously agreed to come on this podcast and talk about some of their experiences. And I'm really grateful to you both for being here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Christine.
you.
It's fun to be here.
It is so fun to have you here. And I've just come off of spending a few days with you guys up here at the cabin and your daughter. And it's just made our family so much richer for everything that you two have gone through to create your family together. And I'd like to invite you to maybe go back a little bit to, years ago when you were really thinking about the decision to foster. And I know that you knew people who had gone through this experience and therefore, felt some community around what this process could look like. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about how that community support and sense of um, not being alone maybe in this, how that impacted your decision.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we decided to become foster parents right during the early days of the pandemic, right?
Mhm.
And that was a little bit just happenstance. It just happened to coincide with the community around us kind of coming to life with all of these new family building arrangements. So we have, two couples in our lives who both have gone through the foster to adopt process, and at that point their kiddos were toddlers, I think. And Shannon and I had been really thinking very seriously for a long time about how and if we wanted to become parents, and this model felt really beautiful and different, and it felt right for us.
Yeah, I mean, so I know you're asking about community, but I'll also just back up and I guess maybe talk a little bit about the decision to become foster parents, at least from my perspective. When I was little, desperately didn't want to have children. And I remember making a pact with myself that if I had a child, I would raise a child, but I wouldn't have a child, so that I would only want to be a parent if I were a parent by adoption or fostering. Um, and but for many, many years that we were together, I didn't think that I wanted to have a kid at all. I just didn't think that that was going to be part of my journey. And then I think that, as for many people, seeing our friends begin to build families through the same route that for me I had already determined was like the only route that I would take. It was interesting and fortuitous to kind of that we encountered people doing this
Mhm.
thing. That was the only way that I thought that we would want to have kids. And actually, before the pandemic, we had thought about fostering, and we took one fostering class, the first one that you have to take, and we took it and then waited so long that we had to take it again. So we had taken that class, and then sort of were stalled out, mostly I think because I was just trying to kind of decide whether or not I wanted to be a parent. And in that time, yeah, the two couples that we knew became parents, to kids that they had fostered and then adopted. And in one case, a child that one of them had biologically had, but their partner adopted their kid. Um, and and that, I think, made that path seem a lot more accessible. And just knowing other people that had gone through all of the classes and that like knew more about, what just the experience, just seeing people with family, and the exact same way that I at least had imagined it would be like to foster a child or to adopt a child, which is like a child appears and then you welcome it into your home, and then that child becomes part of your family. It wasn't like strange, but it was just like being able to vision that allowed me to vision being a parent. Um, and then and so then getting back to your original question, which was like, what was it,
Mhm.
what was the experience like to have community? One of the things that's been really important for me has been the community that I anticipate our daughter having, like knowing that other kids that she knows have gone through this process, and that it's actually not strange or out of the ordinary, and she's not the only one, but that actually she's surrounded by people for whom that's an experience. And in Wisconsin, there's a really cool organization, it's called Wisconsin Families, I think, that essentially runs a camp and a number of programs that are meant to help kids who perhaps don't have the same fortunate experience that we have had, to get together with other adopted families or blended families, and experience that. So that there's a certain kind of like psychological rest, I think, that was perhaps most possible or most helpful, which I would be interested to talk about maybe a little bit more, if that would be useful to you or to other folks, just what it's like psychologically to kind of adapt to being a parent in a model that isn't the dominant normative one, but that is actually one that's really not very uncommon. But yeah, I think that sort of feeling a sense of belonging, feeling a sense of a shared narrative was the most important thing to me, or has been the most important thing to me, more than any kind of like particular sort of like experience, like specific problem solving or specific
Mhm.
experience sharing, just knowing others who are doing the same.
Well, and it's also one of the most bureaucratic forms of parenting. And so there is having community and just suddenly being a parent, which I think is important for everybody's journey. But then being someone who has to interface with the state and agencies in such a dramatic way.
Or sometimes a really not dramatic
Or
way.
yeah, just a very bureaucratic way. Yeah, it's just different. Uh, and it was so helpful to just have people who knew all the acronyms, who knew precisely what we might be challenged with when we were working with this agency, or what we were sort of navigating.
Yeah, yeah. May I
Yeah,
also,
yeah.
sorry, Christine.
No, go ahead, Shannon, please.
Um, One thing that I think was also helpful in terms of having those friends is that I think narratives around kids that end up in foster care, and also narratives around biological parents or biological families whose children enter the system, are so villainizing. The stories that we hear and the attitudes that people often tend to take are often oriented towards thinking of whoever the biological parents are as being deficient in some way, or bad in some way, or naughty in some way. And so that, like, being among friends, and much of the training, the foster training, is about trying to like deprogram some of those narratives, but that's, and that's important, and that's also like an orientation, an ethical and moral and actually just like logical orientation that we have, is to be is to not buy into those things. But it was also such a relief, and has been such a relief, to have friends who don't want to do that, who don't want to sort of frame the story as a kind of good and evil story, and understand the nuances of the situation, even if they don't know the nuances of this particular situation.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that too. And I think that I've learned so much about this whole experience just through being in your sphere as you navigated it. And I do really want to talk more about some of the things that you guys have brought up in this section. And I'm curious if you'd be willing to, like, as we look at the whole idea of preparing to become foster parents, it's such a different experience, when you're going through, say, pregnancy and you're a couple and you're expecting a child, there's sort of like this understood sequence of ways that you prepare, or that we hope like people can prepare. And that's, of course, something that like we would like to see more of, so that the transition into postpartum isn't so challenging for people. However, the foster experience is much different. You're getting a call and then you're making a sudden switch. But I remember you saying that, there that Wisconsin in particular, where you live, had kind of a good system for helping expectant foster parents to prepare in ways that maybe other states or other locations have a different system. But talk
Mhm.
about what you were given with how to understand what you were going to be doing, what you needed to expect.
So we worked, and I'm not sure if this is the case with all of the agencies within Wisconsin, but we worked with an organization that's now called WellPoint, and they have been in existence for many decades, and they have a philosophy of trauma-informed care. And all of their foster parent licensure training is through this lens. And it's a lot, it's a lot just in terms of hours. It is, again, like it's a very intentional path to parenting. And we were in, courses together just to get our initial license. And they really did talk through not just the system itself, but also child development, and child development at 1 day old all the way through adolescence. They talked through navigating difficult situations, making difficult situations beautiful and productive with kids of all ages, and sort of what that means developmentally. And then, as Shannon mentioned, really talked about the family interaction and connecting these kiddos to their family of origin in whatever way makes sense for the child at that age, because there is for all of those kids in the system, there is a trauma, even if they are separated at 1 day or 10 years old. There is a trauma in that separation, and just coming into it knowing that this child has that, and having grace, and never thinking, if there is a behavior, never thinking like, what's wrong there, thinking like, what's the background, what is behind that, and how can you support this child through that section. And I found the training to be incredibly valuable.
Mhm. Yeah. And what you said about trauma-informed care, I think that is exactly what I was thinking about too. And I think your definition of that is really good. And I think something that's interesting about the training is that lots of different families become foster parents. So I know that for your audience, the focus is on like neonatal care. In our trainings, there were families who there were people who were perhaps single and were about to become single moms by becoming single foster moms, and looking to adopt people to foster people of any age. There were like grandmas and cousins and aunts and uncles of kids who, for whatever reason, their biological folks weren't able to care for them at a particular moment in their life. And so we're coming into these family members' care, which meant also that these courses were oriented towards thinking about trauma-informed care at a range of different stages of life. And so they weren't oriented towards how do you help a child to transition back from the intensive care unit or the neonatal intensive care unit to your home. That wasn't like part of the care. It might be that they would imagine a range of different like trauma-based behaviors, like there would be a sort of course where they might describe a trauma-based behavior, and then you were meant to kind of work with other people to imagine how you might respond to that behavior. And those would oftentimes focus on behaviors that are easily described or identifiable as trauma-based. So your 4-year-old does this, or the 11-year-old does this, or the 16-year-old does this. So very few of those are actually thinking about what that might look like for a newborn, which is not I don't mean to suggest like, and now they should go and figure that out. Like I understand why they didn't. And I also think that it's prepared me to just kind of apply that lens in general. But the idea of how to think about trauma-informed care specifically in relation to little ones was something that really we learned about in the case of one of our foster kids who we picked up from the hospital when she was 4 days old. We had an amazing nurse there who spent some hours with us actually helping us to learn to feed our baby and like learn to hold her in certain ways and make sure she was feeding, and also just talk to us a lot about sort of expectations that we might have around her development, and also again a lot of narrative breaking, which was really helpful around her development. So that was a place where that neonatal care piece like there was certainly something to help us a lot, but we leaned a lot on that and then kind of on our own reading to try and figure that out. Because the 3 kids that we've cared for or been foster parents to, the first came to us when he was 2 months old, the second when she was 4 days old, and the third when she was 3 months old. So littles.
Yeah, it's I remember talking to you guys during that time when you were going through those trainings and being really blown away at what you were getting an opportunity to talk about and learn about. And there's also that layer of no matter how much you prepare, there's nothing that's actually going to really teach you until you're in it and you're doing it. Thank you so much for talking about that preparation piece. I'm curious if you would be willing to talk a little bit about what it felt like to get that first call and you said yes to picking up your first little guy.
Yeah, well, I think the one thing that they do prepare you for within this process is that, you get a call and you may specify that you would like a child of a certain age, but the ranges are huge. I think we specified 0 to 2 or maybe 0 to 4 was the smallest, but we would get calls for kids that were 6 or 8 or family units. We got a call once for a family unit of 5 that we just didn't have, capacity because we already had 2 placements, I think, at that moment. But the foster parents, just as an aside for anybody listening, if you are interested in being a foster parent, it is needed almost everywhere, and caregivers are needed, and it's incredibly important and really beautiful and rewarding. Yeah. So with our first, I think we were only licensed for a short time when we got the call about,
I mean, like a week, or a day, it was like that.
Yes. And then that call came, and then there was a delay. And so there was this period of, we got the call, we said yes, And then there was an unexpected delay, but we called everybody anyway to be like, oh my gosh. So that night we had, folks calling us, talking us through, our friends who had taken placements, just figuring out what to do in this initial period.
I ran to Walmart, not a place that I used to go. But yeah, I was like, I guess we need some formula.
Yeah, because you don't know if you get a 2-year-old, your needs are so distinct from a 2-day-old or a 2-month-old, and what you need for license is to have a car seat that can handle that, and all of these car seats can handle big ranges, and a pack and play or a crib. So
and a fire extinguisher.
And a fire extinguisher.
Critical.
Yeah, there are lots of other things, but we just did not know. They tell you don't stock up on clothes, don't stock up on diapers, don't stock up on these because you just don't know. And what we found was that the community just delivered, by
just a quick shout out to the women of Shorewood.
Yeah, we have a very good pal, Susie, who really navigated all of this for us. So
They put out a call on Facebook on the
Marketplace.
Facebook. Well, it was like the Facebook moms page, and was like, so these people have a infant foster kid coming in. Shorewood, if folks don't know, is like the rather wealthy first ring suburb of our town. We don't live in Shorewood, but the women of Shorewood, they showed up, and we got some very primo goodies. Within about 2 hours.
Yeah, so it was pretty shocking, just. That is one thing that I imagine many new parents do, but I think in our situation, because it was a little distinct, we really did have to cast that net wide and immediately. And I think more people, we all should be asking for help more. It's such a beautiful thing. And for us, like, this whole community just held us together. So, we had formula, we had diapers, we had just bins and bins of used clothing that took our first foster kid up till 9 months. I don't think we bought a thing for him. It was amazing just how folks showed up. It was really beautiful.
I mean,
what was surprising for you about, like, so yeah, I mean, I think it is incredible how what we need can come to us when we open ourselves to that community. And I see that happen a lot, and I'm always so grateful and reinforced by that experience. And when you're bringing in a child, whether you have the baby, and in your case, like 0 to baby so fast, what challenges came up that in hindsight you can look back and be like, oh yeah, I wasn't expecting that, or that was harder. Like, thinking about, like, when we can sort of reflect on things, that's like where we really start to realize where we could have used X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
The biggest one that comes for me is just work. I think that the systems that we have for new parents are already pretty deficient, but like across the board. But when it comes to foster parents, adoptive parents, the leave is non-existent. So both Shannon and I, we, suddenly on a Wednesday, we had a 2-month-old, and both had to work the next day. There was no childcare. We couldn't prep for that. There was, it just was shocking. And then, 9 months later, on a Tuesday, suddenly we had a 9-month-old and a 4-day-old, and we still had to work the next day. So that was, looking back, I feel sort of disbelief in in how we managed that. It stresses my now fully slept mind, but at the time I think I just was running on such adrenaline that I couldn't even get stressed out about it.
Well, and FMLA, just again making sure people know their resources, like FMLA does stipulate family leave, so for like employers
that are large enough,
but to use that, but even so, like, I think for a lot of people it's not for me at least, I'm a teacher. It wasn't like feasible to say like one day I might disappear. Like if you have a due date, you have somewhere between, depending upon how quickly like 7 months and a few months, or whatever, to let people know and prepare for that. But as a foster parent, you don't necessarily know when that day is going to come, and it's not as possible to say I'm just going to have everything set up so that I can kind of head out on leave. So I do think work and the kind of transition to teaching the next day, childcare, when you have work the next day, just figuring out how we're going to care for an infant, who in your household is going to care for that infant, or how you're going to try and set up some childcare type situation very quickly.
And we may be some of the few people who'd say, like, thankfully we were in a pandemic, but really there was something very normative at that moment of being like, well, I am in a Zoom meeting with the baby Bjorn on my body.
Yeah. And I think really like the thing that I'm going to say also has to do with just the rapidity of that shift. So what you said around work and just the logistical concerns around that. For me, for my first foster child, and then less so for the other two, but I have other thoughts about that. An identity shift was actually a really big thing for me. I already mentioned that like I had been ambivalent about becoming a parent for my whole life. And then one day I wasn't a parent, and then the next day I was, there wasn't like, there was a lot of taking classes, but there wasn't, again, a sort of preparing for this one, the arrival of the one child at a time that perhaps comes with certain stories, like in the beginning of Lady and the Tramp, with the chop suey and the watermelon. And instead you just like, you're taking classes, and then the classes are over, and there's a lot of interviews, and when the interviews are over, you're just doing all of this kind of bureaucratic work, and then you get a call, and then you say yes to the call, and then you're a parent, like, and so for me, that the challenges around work, and childcare aggravated, I think, a certain kind of like uncertainty about like, am I now a stay-at-home parent? Like, how much of my time am I dedicating to childcare? What does that say about who I am? What does that say about my values? Am I being a good enough parent? Am I putting too much time into this? Am I over, like, am I losing some other sense of who I am? And I imagine that's something that, many parents go through. I don't think that it's limited to folks who are foster parents,
But
but
I wonder if the lack of on-ramp is,
yeah,
makes it feel more acute.
yeah. Well, the lack of on-ramp, and honestly, like the lack of a kind of sense of what's going to happen next, am I prepping for this to be a week-long situation, or month-long situation, or a year, or many years, or
Or
forever?
yeah.
Not knowing the answer to that question makes it hard to narrativize the moment when you bring this
Yes.
baby home. It feels like you feel really, I mean, I still remember like feeling so connected to this child and so invested in this child's life and well-being, and still feel that way about all of our kids. And also in terms of how I was understood. So that's one thing that's true. And also in terms of how I was understanding myself and my life, and what was sort of next for me. Things were then I think the most uncertain, and during those years were the most uncertain years of my life.
How are you sharing your gifts and passion for caregiving with others? In a world where education and awareness around the postpartum window is lacking or missing from our modern systems, we have a profound opportunity to shift that paradigm. You may be a few simple offerings away from making a truly impactful difference in the lives of mothers and families in your community. We are here to support your journey in the ways that work best for you. Schedule a conscious care strategy session to meet one-on-one with me, and let's identify the right next step for you to begin a path of conscious care for new families that fits your life and your needs. Visit www.sacredwindowstudies.com/strategy-session to schedule a time that works best for you. That's www.sacredwindowstudies.com/strategy-session.
I would love to let's look a little closer at this aspect because, Kat, you brought up earlier about how, yeah, when you're in these classes, it's really about the focus is the hope is that these children will be reunited with their parents or their
Mhm.
families. That is the goal. And
Yes.
so coming into the foster experience, like you know that and you're holding that and
Mhm.
you're honoring that, you're like really wanting that, and you become really invested in these babies' lives, these children's
Mhm.
lives. They become a part of your family. And so that experience of trying to and each child is going to have a different story with different considerations and different
Mhm.
you know likelihoods of that happening or not, and
Mhm.
you really have experienced a spectrum of
Mhm.
where in some cases the parents become a part of your family,
Mhm.
and in other, so talk about like what that, and I know going through it's like you're like you said, it feels like you're just adrenaline, you're just doing it. There's not really time to consider it because you're just in it. But how does it feel a little bit now when you look back on and how that navigating all those family members too
Mhm.
impacted the experience? For good and challenging, in some ways
Because you
it's
really are
positive.
sort of co-parenting alongside people you have never met,
Mhm.
and it's in sort of beautiful and surprising ways and incredibly frustrating
Mm.
ways too.
For everybody, I'm sure.
For
Yeah.
everyone, yes, yeah, and you're right. We did have quite a spectrum of connection. With our first placement, it was very evident that reunification, like we were, sort of cheerleaders for that throughout. It certainly didn't impact, the way we parented at all. I mean, you can't be in presence of these kids for 24 hours, let alone like 24 minutes without just loving them with your whole
Mhm.
heart. But that was part of it. And as you kind of alluded to, we did um, bring mom and dad sort of into our lives in ways that felt, when it felt appropriate, in ways that felt appropriate throughout the time. But that felt really important to us and was challenging. And I look back on that and I'm like, wow, that was challenging at times.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then with another kiddo, we had grandparents who were super involved. You get really good at starting to send texts to a whole community of folks. Or, it was yeah, it was really interesting.
Mhm. I think that all those things are true. I think that for me, when I look back on that, something that I think about is what a difficult time I had holding the two things can be true thing. Um, so for example, when our first kid reunited with his mom, um, that was such a happy outcome, and I was so sad.
Mhm.
Um, and I really struggled actually to allow myself to feel that sadness because I felt really guilty about it
Mhm.
because I thought like this is what's supposed to happen. So like I
Mhm.
felt like to be sad would be to kind of root against the best outcome, or that it would be like an unloving thing to feel. Um, and so that, and also I've mentioned, feeling like aware of other narratives and aware of ways in which it seemed as though some folks that I knew were less inclined to see our first foster kid's mom as like just somebody who was had been dealt a hard hand and was really trying to work it out and successfully did. And so because of feeling defensive of her, like feeling defensive of his mom, I also felt like if I let anybody know that I was sad, that it would somehow fail her and fail him and fail this attempt to show how important that reunification was for us as a goal. And so like grief is just such a part of the process of fostering. As I said, I mean, maybe for some people it isn't, but I have a hard time imagining that it wouldn't be. Because I definitely tried to pretend that it wasn't for a while, and that wasn't a good choice. But that's what I remember as being the primary thing that I'm still trying to kind of find my way through, is what it felt like to be happy about an outcome and so sad about it, and to be rooting, to essentially caring for a kid with all my heart, and also rooting for them to no longer be in my life in the same way. And then in the sort of aftermath of that, aftermath is perhaps the wrong word, but in the period that followed that, knowing that our sort of role is to stay really open to being family to our kids, and really wanting that, and also knowing that this period that was very special for us, which was knowing this terrific kid and having them in our life, was also perhaps the hardest period in the life of this kid's parents. The period where they felt shame and where they were disconnected from their child. And so also knowing that connections with us might be really fraught for them, and feeling grateful for those connections which we've had, and also having to be prepared for that being too much for the bio families. So yeah, thinking about the kind of maintenance of both grief and joy kind of all the way through was a big thing for me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon. I know that we just felt all the feels with you all through those years. And do you feel like it changed, or there was like more sort of nuance or preparation when the second two babies came into your lives after the first time?
Mm. Um, I think that we were given a mentor when we first became foster parents, and her name was Judy, and she has fostered, I think, 50 children or 60.
Our child who we adopted was the 60th.
The 60th,
Yeah, because Judy just coincidentally had fostered her very briefly before we became her permanent foster to adopt parents.
Yeah. And so I'm certain that like when you have fostered that many kids, you figure out a mode, right? Like you figure out the things that help you. So I'm not sure that I ever found that mode exactly. But I do know that whereas I think perhaps Christine, this is probably the same for you with each of your kids, like the first kid, you think it's going to be similar with the second kid, and in fact a bunch of things are really different. And for me, or maybe you're really different, or maybe both, but I think the first round of becoming a foster parent had so much to do with navigating my sense of identity. For me, that was the biggest challenge. And then by our third kid, it was about navigating uncertainty and fear. Like that was it was like the first round, I was like, I know this is uncertain and I can handle it. Like it's cool. Like it's fine. This is what it's supposed to be, and by our third kid, I was like, this is so uncertain. Like, don't get attached to things. And I did get attached to our child, thank goodness. It wasn't like that was not a challenge, but I just had a kind of low grade fear, I think, in the I mean, probably we're still overcoming that fear, but I definitely
Sure.
had low grade fear for many, 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 many months. When she became part of our lives, because I just was scared that,
It's so uncertain.
yeah,
Yeah.
losing her.
Yeah, I found the actual, so we essentially had babies in the house for like a year and a half straight almost.
Mhm.
There was a brief period, but it
Or
was
newborns, really, yeah, because
newborns,
we still have
yeah.
a baby in the house.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, she's, I don't know,
She's a big tot.
3, yeah, she's a big tot.
Mhm.
But it, you know, so I felt by the time our third kiddo came into the house, I felt actually really much more confident just about babydom. You know, I was
Mhm.
like, I have got this. I've done 3 babies in quick succession,
Mhm.
haven't even had time to forget the knowledge of the first, like
Mhm. I
bring
haven't
it on.
slept in years.
Yeah, who needs it? Who needs it?
Mhm.
So I remember telling our mom that I was like, I feel so confident about parenting till 9 months, and then
Who knows? Yeah, yeah.
so that part really did become easier. I mean, Chris, you were the wonderful support for me with so many anxious moments about fevers
Mhm.
and you know, just various things that when you've had a few babies, you're like, yeah, that happens sometimes, and that is so scary. And also, you know what to do, and it's okay, you know. And by the time the third came around, I felt much more confident in those things. But it was, yeah, just the system. I never quite, and maybe you never do, but I never quite got the full kind of fluency with it or confidence in it because it is a system that is uncertain. There are just a phenomenal number of moving parts, and there's so little that you have control over. And in some ways, it does force you to just be incredibly present. Our second placement, we had her in the house, you know, from when she was 4 days old, up until she was about 3 months, I think. And I remember that time as if it were 3 years. You know,
Mhm.
it is just it like she is such a huge part of our lives, even though it was only 3 months. And I think there's such a beauty in that,
Mhm.
you know, of having those little moments. But yeah, I don't
Like
know if that,
time moves differently, you know?
yeah.
It's such a potent time. It's such a magical
Mhm.
transitionary time that like weaves itself into all the layers of being, and therefore when we look at it, it feels like it was so
Yeah.
much longer than it was. Yeah.
Mhm.
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 Yeah. Yeah. I know that you know, you're like Shannon, you've talked about, you know, your sense of identity, and it's like such a real thing for people becoming parents, and all of a sudden we're things just aren't the same, and
Mhm.
somehow we are, but we have to like become shifted in some ways to really come back to that settled understanding of who we are, and that is really impactful to our relationships too. And I know that, you know, you guys have shifted in the ways that you're in relationship, and so many people do, but I'm wondering if you feel like there's ways that you've become closer through
Mhm.
going through what you have together.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think it took a really long time, you know, I mean, parenting, obviously, that creates such a different dynamic between partners in that way. And I think that came very easily to us.
Mhm.
And we still have such fun as co-parents as that develops with our, you know, as our child grows up. It's just amazing how that continues to evolve. And I feel so in sync with you in that. Um, but I think there was something that our grief, you know, you grieve alone, uh, even if it is both people are grieving the same thing, like your journey is so your own. And
Mhm.
I think that you and I really it was so tricky to navigate those early months and years of that while parenting. But coming back together after that has been really powerful. And I think you and I have an even deeper understanding of not only this situation, but so many others. Like, we're able to look back at 20 years of knowing each other and sort of have a new understanding of things.
I think something that seemed anecdotally true to me in our foster classes is that it seemed like a lot of people who become foster parents are often people of faith. And that's not me. But I mention that because it makes sense to me that the structure of a particular kind of religion or community in which you sort of have a certain kind of like foundational kind of shared understanding of the way that the world works or the way that your morality is. I think that maybe I think it makes sense that it offers people some help, and especially as like if they're partnered, like help in relating to one another through this like shared commitment to a particular like cosmology or faith or set of values or something like that. And I think so I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that the grief part was really hard, I think, for us in our connection to one another, because at least for me, in the absence of being able to say, like, my sadness has meaning, my grief has meaning in this narrative that we share, and we can both like lean on that particular narrative. It's possible as like a humanist like I am to come up with poetic meanings and kind of build a set of those, but it's a bit more work than just being handed that thing, you know. And so in that period of time, you know, when Kat was upset or sad about saying goodbye to one of our kids, I was like, you got to stop it, you know, like all those feelings that I had about not wanting to be able to feel certain emotions myself, I also felt like, you know, Kat shouldn't feel, or and so that early stage of grieving, I think, was really hard. And I think we moved in different directions on the basis of that. Kat really wanting to be like hold things down and be really secure, and me really wanting to kind of like be sort of flitting about, or like kind of, you know, like trying to suck up more life in a certain kind of way, both of which I think are fine. But that early period was, as I said, like really hard. And I think it's really just through both of us wanting to be better people and knowing that we want to be connected as a family, and knowing that we love our kids so much. And also, I think, really trusting one another, and like having faith in one another to kind of make it through that difficulty, which wasn't really like a schism or anything. It was just like such a grief-filled kind of time where I don't think we could really quite find each other at all. Again, because of not maybe having that sort of story, and then just having faith that one another could find our way there, and then each of us working on ourselves to try and find a way to kind of be at peace with ourselves, and also be dedicated to the family that we want to have, and the kid whom we adore and want to raise together. So I think, in answer to your question, I don't feel like it was the grief that brought us together or the hardship that brought us together, but actually the things that pre-existed those, that allowed me at least to kind of find my way through that kind of morass, to a place where I could, be open to being very close with someone who had shared my pain. And that was itself hard, I think, for a while.
Yeah, and to sort of bring it back full circle to think about community in that, you know, I think our community that rallied around us during this kind of chaotic time of placements and suddenly becoming parents, it's that same community that held us through this process of ambiguous grief mixed with like changes and in our dynamic, and figuring out just how to move forward. And it has been such, I don't know, it's like when you reach out to people and not only ask for help, but you're just really vulnerable and honest about kind of what you're feeling, it just gives back in such a great, beautiful way. And I just feel so thankful that we have those folks who were willing to not only listen, but share and show up and hold us during, messy and messy times, as well as the laughter-filled times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I just, as someone who has known you for all these years and has been witness to the journey that you've been on, I just cannot think of one way that you could have done it with more heart and more compassion for the children, for the families, for each other, and certainly for all the people in your family too. It's been such a gift to be part of this journey in the peripheral way that I get to, and I just can't thank you enough for being vulnerable to come and share a little bit of what that was for you both.
Well, Christine, you were not peripheral
No.
at all. We're
No.
not and are not. And in terms of I listeners at home, something that was really, I think, very meaningful. Again, friends at home, you may have noticed that it was very difficult for me, and often is difficult for me, to deal with or to express certain elements of grief or loss. But something that I think is a useful resource to others is thinking, or it might be a useful resource again to listeners at home, is thinking about ways to help foster parents to kind of recognize and ritualize transitions, like not just the transition to having a kid, but the transition to saying goodbye to a kid who will, be with a new family, or not for them a new family, their traditional family. And when, like after we had said goodbye to kind of 2.5 of our foster kids, because we had nearly we had offered to foster the parent of one of our foster kids, and that
Who was a
another story.
foster child themselves.
Yeah. And when you gave us those, just some ornaments with the letters of their names on them for Christmas, and things that we still hang on our tree, like just that kind of awareness or acknowledgement of the role that they had played, and the place that they had kind of in our hearts and in our family, like at Christmas time, and sort of with this wider community. That recognition just from you was really meaningful, and yeah, helps me over some really difficult parts. So
Thank you, Shannon. We love you guys so much. I know that this conversation is going to be supportive to many people who are considering this path, who are in this path, and who are supporting others in this path. And thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to add to this conversation before we say goodbye?
Just, thank you for for having us, for wanting to have this conversation, but also for the intentionality and care that you bring to so many families, and your work, and then the wider work of everybody who might be listening. It really makes a difference. I mean, the more support that all parents can have is yeah, we all need it. It does take this big community.
yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you, listeners at home, for caring for the foster parents in your community, or for being foster parents, or for caring for the little ones who've been returned to you, or for the little ones who you get to be with all the time.
Thank you, everyone.
Shanti, Shanti.
Center for Sacred Window Studies has been training postpartum care providers, professionals who work with new families, and individuals passionate about postpartum care since 2018. We regularly host live free events alongside our online and in-person training and certification programs. Hop on our newsletter list to get direct access to all of our events and community support gatherings. Our mission is not only in training conscious postpartum care providers, but in fostering a robust, informed, and thriving community of postpartum professionals. Once you step inside, you're family forever. Visit www.sacredwindowstudies.com to add your email to our newsletter list. You can support our work by subscribing to the Sacred Window podcast and sharing with someone you know who would love it. Thanks for being here and participating in the culture-wide shift that recognizes the need for and the importance of conscious postpartum care.